Yo, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm inspired. I got the opportunity to listen to some of the speakers earlier, so I feel really invigorated. So excited.
Honestly, this is an honor. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with Kay. Fam, you're the founder of the Smiling Boys Project, and we both are here today because we work in the same field, right? We work in schools around the topic of masculinities with men and with boys. And I think for a lot of the listening audience, they probably don't know what it's like to be in schools. Unless they're teachers, for most of us, the last time we were in school was when we were in school, right? Like when we were students. So I'm wondering if you can paint a bit of a picture for the audience of what the context of working in school is like in 2022.
Yeah, so for the teachers in this room, I'm sure this is not alien to you, but I think, again, in terms of the protected characteristics, so I work specifically with black boys. So within the school, there's a micro experience that they undergo, and ultimately, I think lots of rules, lots of sanctions, some incredibly carceral, a lot of them highly disproportionate to particular groups, and obviously in this case, black boys particularly. But also, I think it's important to also highlight there's a lot of love in schools, and there's a lot of intentions that are placed in the wrong places, but the desire's there. I guess it's a mishmash of all those things within a school environment.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? Like to acknowledge that school is not all bad, right? We're not trying to alienate the teachers here. We're not saying that you're a lot of trash. This is important to recognize that people are doing the best job that they can do in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But in loads of cases, that's also causing a lot of harm. And like you say, specifically to black boys. Is that experience of working with black boys in particular different to working with all boys in general?
Yes, that's the short answer to that. I think creating something which to them is the closest semblance of a safe space within an environment that actually, surprisingly, most of them don't feel safe, is something that is very racially homogenous in terms of that provision, right. Because depending on the school, sometimes they are either the majority in the school but don't feel like it,
right.
or they are the minority in that school and therefore feel over-policed for that nuanced behavior that's culturally relative to them, and in a wider context of the school is seen as just being disruptive and all these other things. So yeah, so there's definitely a very tangible difference in that.
Right, and you're on a bit of a mission, right? In fact, I want to start with a little bit of a quote. So this is a quote from Auntie Bell Hooks. It says, teenagers are the most unloved group in the nation, more specifically, black teenage boys. Emotionally abandoned by parents and by society as a whole, many black boys are angry, but no one really cares about this anger unless it leads to violent behavior. And this is really important, right? Both of us sitting here as black men, I'm sure that we've both felt this experience of having all of these emotions, having all of these feelings, and having no outlet for them, not knowing where to direct those kinds of feelings. And you're on a mission to restore the humanity of black boyhood, which is a pretty powerful sentiment, right? But I'm interested in what that means and where that humanity is lacking in what areas. What's that like for the boys?
So I think for all of us, I want us to kind of imagine, honestly, what visual imagery comes to our mind when we think about black boys. For a second, think about that. And to genuinely ask yourself, does it look like this? And if we're being honest with ourselves, we would know that this is not the imagery that subconsciously sits within our minds when we think of black boys, right? And my mission to restore the humanity is knowing that there's a dearth of these types of images in our conscious and subconscious minds, which have a direct correlation to disproportionalities when we think about school exclusion rates, which is 3.5 times more for black boys. When we think about stop and search within the London context of 9.5 times more than any other race. And then in the Mental Health Act attainment as well, which is 4 times more. So recognizing that these things are not coincidences, and these things are not, they are direct byproducts of these informed and reinforced images that already sit in our mindset. So for me, having images and using this as a kind of vehicle to really shift in the humanities that is not afforded to black boys into the forefront of our mind is the central part of my mission.
And these pictures are so beautiful. Look at these boys. Do you know what I'm saying? Look at these guys, man. Beautiful pictures of boys smiling and being happy and enjoying their lives. And you're right, this is not the image that we see in the media. This is not like the kind of picture that is painted to us when we look on TV, when we look in films. I was going to say when we listen to podcasts, but doesn't quite work. But what I am interested in, right, is this image that you speak of, so this negative portrayal of black boys, is this something that is internalized by them? Is this something that they are feeling about themselves and about their peers, or is it just something that's being put onto them?
I mean, it's an interesting thing to really explore in that regard, because I think it's a combination. So if we think about these images, the contrast between these two images, same person, and it's, so the program, at the end of the 8th week of the program, I photographed the boys and really challenged them to show a version of themselves that I've seen in the classroom for the last 8 weeks, and a version of themselves that they know exists. But do they feel safe enough to continually show that version to the world? And so the black and white images represent what they give me first, which is what perhaps is what they are used to seeing of themselves. Right. That's what people are used to expecting of them, and that's what potentially feels the safest for them. And what you see in the colored images is the truer version of themselves that I earned the right to challenge them to show after the whole period of 8 weeks of building trust and exploring various things, which we will get onto shortly. So I think there's a projected image, which is outward facing, where people see that version of themselves because that's safer for them to walk in their neighborhoods looking like that. So nobody wants to check them and test their masculinity. Right. But ultimately, there's also a version that is projected upon them through the media representation and all of these things that then become a self-fulfilling prophecy of what they perceive, that everybody expects me to be this way anyway, so I might as well step into that role with more comfortability.
Right, and you speak about this idea of earning the right to challenge them to show that side of themselves, and about this 8-week process, which I'm sure everybody's interested to learn about. And for me, right, as somebody who does this work as well, who goes into schools and works with boys in maybe a slightly different format, one of the things that I think is it's rare to see them looking like this, right? Like, I think what we see here in these images is the real transition from the image that they portray to the world into the truer versions of themselves. And I feel like it's really hard to get them to open up and to just smile and be present. So I'm wondering what your theory of change is, right? Like, how are you using photography and conversations to move them from this point to this point? How does that work?
Right, so I think before the program was designed, I traveled to the top 5 happiest countries in the world to explore what makes people happy. And then this research was then used to kind of create a creative arts program, which uses photography, poetry, and film to really empower these boys with the tools to unpick all these themes. So if we have a look at the slides shortly, yes. These are the 8 pillars that the program is rooted upon. So each week, so the program is 8 weeks long. So as I highlighted before, the first week is about building trust with these boys, which empowers them to unpick what does trust look like. Do they experience trust within this institution of schooling, in their household, within their friendships? And then ultimately, freedom being one of the very key pillars that we unpick. What does it mean as a black boy to be free? Right. To authentically be yourself. Is there spaces that are curated for you to do that openly, honestly? And then by the point when we end up at the final week, which is the week around purpose, that's when I bring out the cameras to photograph them. I set up their school, just as you can see over there, with some colorful backdrops, and I asked them to come in and choose a color that speaks to their soul. And ultimately, most of them say, "Do you have black background, bro?" I'm like, "Unfortunately, I need that black, bro. There's no black, so you're gonna have to choose another color." Right. And really empowering them. Again, they were openly exposed to that from the first session when I step into the classroom, which obviously, as you can tell, I probably don't wear much black. So at that point, they recognize that this is a challenge for them to really step out of their comfort zone, which has always been curated from the beginning of the 8 weeks. And then we see the contrast. You know, this young person in front of this image that you can perhaps see, you know, we had a 45-minute conversation of why he doesn't feel like he wants to show his smile. And we had to get to the bottom of that, you know. So each image that you see, there's a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes in the conversation in terms of empowering them to really challenge what it is that is really uncomfortable to them about showing this version of themselves. And then we have Nando's as well to celebrate. Yeah. You gotta have that.
So for anybody trying this at home, right, the 2 keys are have Nando's at the end and don't introduce the cameras on week 1.
That's right.
What I want to know, right, is you speak about this idea of freedom from this idea of almost this like uniform of black masculinity that is placed upon these boys, the things that they have to wear, the things that they have to say, the ways that they have to behave. What does freedom from that look like for the boys? Because I'm imagining you're not super prescriptive, right? You're not saying, all right, now you have to dress like me and talk like me. So what is that image of freedom for those boys?
So, again, just like you highlighted, the ambition is not for it to be, you know, one size fits all. Freedom is authentically being yourself and to be able to feel empowered to be that version of yourself in any space and everywhere that you can be. So the next slide, which is an image that would kind of bring to light. So these are the same young boys that are standing in front of a one-dimensional visual of themselves. So this is a 3-dimensional versus a 1-dimensional. And then you see...
guys, man, I can't deal with it, honestly. It's too much.
Right. So again, they're 14. Usually 13, 14 is the age group that I work with. Some of them are taller than me, bigger than me. So this particular billboard was in Hackney, and there's a group of these boys. We were celebrating their images being in their environment, not because they were drug dealers or killed or all these other reasons, but just because. And then there's a corner shop not too far from this particular billboard. And then while we were there, these boys all went into they tried to get into the corner shop to get some things. And then the shopkeeper didn't allow them in for reasons that I'm sure we are all pretty aware of, right? But to be quite explicit, if some of us are in any such doubts, these boys weren't allowed to come in strictly because they were all black boys dressed in a particular way. And I'm not even sure whether if they were dressed differently, that would make a difference. Right. But with all the information that we have, they were dressed like this, which is how most teenagers in London that live in the inner city dress, right? So they were refused entry. And then I was informed of this, and I decided to just go into the store. So this shopkeeper was like, oh, those are your images outside, because I've seen you here a couple of times putting them up, man. They're amazing. I love those images. I love that. I was like, do you really? Because the same human beings that were in that image attempted to come into the store, and you refused all of them. But yet you speak of this positive emotion that you have connected to this images. Right. And so for me, freedom in the context of these boys' experiences is recognizing that the way the world perceives you has a premeditated outcome even before you show up. Yeah. And how you choose to show up may or may not affect the breadth of freedom that you have. And for that, you have to be conscious. So for them to think, okay, wearing a black tech fleece is great because that's how you express yourself. But is that the only way in which you can feel free to express yourself? And are you consciously disallowing yourself from expanding into beyond a tech fleece if that is inherently what is genuine to you? And really giving them the space to interrogate that without judgment and empowering them to really expand what potentially they feel the license to be free looks like for a black boy like them that lives in Peckham, Tottenham, Edmonton, Brixton, Kennington, all these areas. Right. That sounded like a rap, but it wasn't.
I mean, the bars was fluid, you know. But I want to wrap this up here with one last question, which is, for those of us who are going to engage with this work, some of us might have seen it around, we might have seen it at the Barbican, we might have seen it out and about on the streets, we might see it here today. For those of us who are witnessing the work that you've made with these boys, what is your hope for the afterlife of that work? And what would you say to those of us who are viewers of it about what we can do to change the tide of what's going on here?
Yeah, I think the afterlife question for me is, I think this image really resonates so strongly with me in that the first kind of hope for that is that the younger generation of children grow up with a plethora of images that expand the humanity of black boys like this.
Right.
So as this little child is being pointed to look at black boys like her cousins or uncles or whoever it is in her life, to see this humanity, the cheekiness, the joyousness that exuberates from their faces, is for that to be commonplace. That's the first hope.
Right.
And in terms of like, what can we do? Is so, for example, with this particular partnership with the institution that I partnered with, is to recognize that these faces are alien in that space.
Right.
When young boys like this go into those spaces, they don't feel welcomed. And that's not just a perceived feeling, that's a conscious over-policing. That is a dearth of these images and people that look like that, that freely walk around that space. So this partnership was designed specifically to interrogate who feels like they belong there. Again, the second pillar of the program speaks around belonging, togetherness and belonging. Who feels like they belong where? So for me, the challenge is the spaces that we occupy in our personal lives, in our professional and outwardly as human beings. How do we recognize, firstly, that the images that are subconsciously lodged in our minds don't look like this of black boys? So when we recognize that, the second question is, what do we do to recenter a bit more fairness and equity in the ways in which we see young black boys being spoken to, treated, and being on the receiving end of disproportionalities, be it in the education system, the criminal justice system, or mental health institutions, to really start to actively question that within ourselves, whether be it micro or macro, to seek to always respond to that thought that comes in your mind.
Right. Okay, man, we could do this literally all day. I feel like I've got like a good 4 more hours of this in me. But we're going to wrap it up here. Bro, thank you so much for joining me today. It's honestly, again, my honor and my privilege to share the stage with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, guys. Thank you.